Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Great to have you back. Lots to talk about. It's been an exceptionally interesting week. As you know, we recorded last week's show on the Sunday morning so that we would be able to discuss what happened the day before at the SNP conference. Now, normally that's it. You're on to a new week, something happens, but the fallout from that has been quite incredible. And in fact, I can say on behalf of Liberate Scotland, as I've been told and seen myself, the inquiries, people from the SNP getting in touch, people from other independence parties getting in touch. It's going through the roof. The Liberate Scotland website is getting battered. The emails are pouring in. And in fact, a very senior, in fact, one senior, one very senior SN people in touch with us directly to talk about their discomfort on what's happened and what's going on. But we'll get into that and lots more tonight, because it is something that you are all interested in. Phil, nice to have you back. We didn't have you last week. You were a busy boy in America. Just to say, the question we're asking here is, what will happen if Westminster say no? For a start, do you think that John's great plan will work?
Well, there's the one classic answer to that, isn't it? John's chances of winning and even being in a position to ask for the Section 30, as Eva mentioned earlier prior to the show. It's a classic, 2 chances, none and F all. So it's just not going to happen. And we all know it's not going to happen. John knows it's not going to happen. And it allows them to continue to push this illusion forward that they somehow represent the people of Scotland and are actually interested in an independent Scotland. For years now, many of us, including all of us in this show, have been exposing the SNP leadership since Nicola Sturgeon and our little cabal took power for what they are. And what they are is a unionist devolution party more concerned with retaining their completely ineffective positions, when it comes to liberating Scotland, that is, as UK government apparatchiks, happily stealing the people of Scotland's future and the future of our children for a few pieces of silver. This is the very definition of betrayal, as they pay lip service to the independence cause, which is what the majority of us in Scotland want. Now, years ago, I remember nervously and quite tentatively first using the word betrayal and to describe Nicola Sturgeon, although obviously others had identified and figured out that that's what she was doing, but to use it on the Prism, and we got pelters for it, but it's plain to see for everybody. And one of the first to publicly come out with this, with the fact that the SNP leadership, after Alex, of course, had been completely taken over and were now working at the behest of the British establishment, was, of course, our Wings Over Scotland. The excellent Reverend Stuart Campbell continues to run the most read political blog on Scottish independence around, and his article called A Case Study in Delusion from the 14th of October 2025 is a must-read for all independentistas who want to know what's really going on in Scottish politics. Now, he examines the superb article by Kevin McKenna titled, "When will SNP voters finally realise they've been conned?" I mean, there you have it. To see it in big print in a newspaper was great for me, because I just haven't read the newspapers for ages, for decades now, because I know who owns them. But paraphrasing the article, which we should read, it's summarised with a classic quote attributed to Mark Twain: "It's far easier to fool someone than to convince them that they've been fooled." Now, but that doesn't help us understand the mindset or even being able to figure out how to wake these people up, which is ironic considering most of them believe that they're already woke. You know, how do you wake up someone who thinks they're woke already? Jesus. Wake up and smell a coffee, guys. But it's it pisses you off. And then he goes in, he pitches in with an Orwell quote, which one of my favourites. I'm a big fan of Orwell. As you know, when I lived in India, I went and visited his birthplace, etc. But crime stop, this is a quote directly from 1984. Crime stop means the faculty of stopping short as though by instinct at the threshold of any dangerous thought. It includes the power of not grasping analogies, of failing to perceive logical errors, of misunderstanding the simplest arguments if they are inimical to ingsoc, and of being bored or repelled by any train of thought which is capable of leading in a heretical direction. Crime stop, in short, means protective stupidity. It just absolutely nails it. But stupidity is not enough. On the contrary, orthodoxy, in the full sense, demands a control over one's own mental processes as complete as that of a contortionist over his body. And then the Rev goes on, doesn't mince his words, but how do we wake people up and let them smell the coffee and understand what's really going on here? And because people are just not interested in politics, they're not going to read the accounts of a country. They're not going to worry about it. They associate SNP with independence, but every single day, more and more are realising that they've been hijacked. And that's what we need to do. We need to make sure, and sadly, it saddens me to say, but it's the only solution I can see is that the SNP are absolutely destroyed at this next year, and I think it's the only way that we can force the SNP to regroup, reband, get rid of the traitors within in the leadership, and set back on the course for independence, nothing less.
Yeah. If I may just pull you up for one thing, I mean, you're right about Stu Campbell, fantastic. If you want to know what's going on, you said read Wings Over Scotland. I would say, or watch Through a Scottish Prism if you want to know what's going on. You're meant to be promoting us, not someone else.
Well, it's about unification and teamwork.
Well, our doors are open to everyone and anyone. In fact, on that, I should just say, Stephen Kerr, that absolute diehard English-born Scottish Conservative, was complaining that no one would debate with him on independence. I've sent him an invite and invited him onto Through a Scottish Prism, where we will debate unionism versus independence anytime, any day he likes. He was talking about, they always run away when you want to debate that. Well, Stevie baby, come to daddy. We'll give you the biggest debate you've ever had in your life. Probably a short show, folks. It won't last long, because unionism doesn't have an argument. They don't have a positive case. They have nothing to say. But that's one of the things I find funny, Alan, because at the end of the SNP conference, the Tories have done the same, Labour have done the same. All the drones come out. Oh, what a fantastic speech by Keir Starmer. What a fantastic speech by John. What a fantastic speech by Kemi Badenoch. We're back, we're in. They all say they self-congratulate themselves. But even their allies, they're great allies, Alan. It's not just people like ourselves and Liberate Scotland are saying, this is useless, John. It won't work. Even their great pals in the Green Party, one of the co-leaders, little Mr. There you go, Ross Gear, even he's saying it doesn't work. It's bigger than one party. He's saying what we've been saying all along. You need two parties under the bastardized DeHont system they use at the Holyrood to win an election and a majority, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off by saying be careful what you wish for with Mr. Kerr, because I've heard that he's a master debater, or at least I think that's what I heard. But, I mean, it's bad games when you have the Green Party criticising your route to independence, when you see the Green Party's route isn't a red line. I mean, they have made that very clear, that independence is not a red line for them. They've also made it clear that unless you're willing to allow men in frocks into women's dressing rooms, then you're not welcome in their party, or even as a
support. I don't even want your vote.
Yes. So, I mean, their route is even worse than what the SNPs are. But if they're criticising the SNPs, it shows how bad it is. I mean, in order to have a route to independence, the SNP supporters are actually at a crossroads just now. They've got a choice of going down the road to nowhere or taking the highway to independence. because there is absolutely no way that they can have a majority in the Scottish Parliament. The election just does not allow that, unless they're prepared to sacrifice many, and I mean many, of their constituency seats. Because Alex Salmond had nowhere near the amount of constituency seats that the SNP have now when he got the majority, because it was fluked. He just managed to get enough constituency seats that didn't really affect the list votes. And that's how Alec got the majority there. It cannot be planned for. It cannot be campaigned for. It is pure and utter luck. And we are not about to have our independence decided by a pooling of straws, because that is exactly what the SNP are doing. But if you look at both Greens, Greens, SNP and Alba, they've got one major flaw in their route. They're all asking Westminster. There is no plan B for when Westminster says no. Our plan is totally different, because our plan is to go in there and say to Westminster, we are an independent country. Get around the negotiation table now and we will negotiate with you. If they fail to do that, then we start running the Parliament as if it is an independent Parliament. We force Westminster to continuously hit us with Section 35s, overruling our democratic legitimacy. And that shows the United Nations that we are a non-governing territory, because Westminster is overruling the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland. That's how you run the Parliament. And if you look back, that's actually how Alex Salmond ran it. He ran the Parliament as if it was an independent Parliament. He never asked Westminster for permission. The difference being is Westminster were too scared to challenge Alec, because they knew what Alec would have been doing at that stage. Whereas with John Swinney, he just buckles down every single time because they don't have a spine. We need people in that Parliament who are in there to do one job and to deliver that job. There shouldn't be in there to fill up seats in that Holyrood Parliament. They should be in there to make that Parliament an independent Parliament. And at this present time, there's only one organisation that is prepared and have the bottle to do that, and that is Liberate Scotland.
Yeah. One time they did, I mean, Alec was talking, if you remember, in 2003, I think it was, when he was talking, or 2007 rather, he was talking about changing the local government tax, the council tax. But Gordon Brown turned around and said, well, you know, they weren't going to, if we tried to change it, the council tax, they were going to withdraw the money from Westminster, not only because it's only partial, council tax only pays partial, the rest comes from central government. They were going to pull that money if he tried to change. And then what did they do? They then said, oh, but you promised to change the council tax and you didn't do it, and used it as a big stick to beat them. They've got no morals whatsoever. But it wasn't just Ross. But here's the thing, him being so indignant about, we need two parties and it's independent. We're an independence party. They haven't said anything in 5 years of independence, Lloyd. But here's their co-leader. Their co-leader was asked if there was an independent motion to be debated at the party's conference. No. Our independent party is always a strategy. No, there's nothing to be discussed. So they're not even discussing it, but they're going to go to the electorate in 26 and say, oh, we're an independence party. We support independence. Only till the polls close at 10:30.
I think it's entirely and completely irrelevant. I mean, I think the important thing to draw from what was quoted on the screen there is the fact that Gillian Mackay, the co-leader of the Green Party of Scotland, didn't know what's on the agenda for our party conference this coming weekend. That's how low things have become. That aside, there are three things here as far as I'm concerned with regard to what Westminster will say or it will not say. Number one, the plan as outlined by the current leader of the Scottish National Party and first factor of Scotland, John Swinney, is something that he could do tomorrow. He has a majority in the Parliament now. What he wants to do after May 2026, he could do it tomorrow with the assistance of the Greens. And he's not going to do that. So I think some people are beginning to pick up on that. Second thing is this. There is, as everyone has said, there is no plan B. the Supreme Court has said that he can't go ahead and have a referendum off his own bat using the powers of the Scottish Parliament, so he would require to have another Section 30 or an order of a similar kind from Westminster, and Starmer said very clearly that that's not going to happen. But John has said, as he did on the last day of the conference in his speech, that he has a secret plan. Now, is this the same secret plan that Nicola had? Have they passed it to each other in this golden bowl that gets handed from one leader to the next, the great secret plan of the leaders of the Scottish National Party? It is, of course, utter and complete guff. John thinks he can get away with what Nicola got away with. She never actually came out and said it publicly. She spread it through the party as a rumour that she had a secret plan using her apparatchiks. She wasn't stupid enough to actually say it in public. John has now said it in public. And as a result of that, particularly the unionist press are saying, well, I'm sorry, you can't go into the election next year without telling us what your secret plan is. And John says to this, just you watch. No one knows the strategies I will deploy. Aye, because you don't know either, John. But let's get down to fundamentals. Both Gillian Mackay, Ross Greer, the co-leaders of the Green Party, and John Swinney and Keith Brown, the leader and deputy leader of the Scottish National Party, cannot tell us what a woman is. Right? That's the first thing. The Green Party have said that they do not want the votes from women who believe, women of gender critical views, women that believe that the Green Party's commitment to the rights of trans identified individuals should trump all rights for women and girls in Scotland. John Swinney is the man who produced the guidance for schools when he was Education Minister, which enshrined trans activism in our schools. And I ask the question, as I have done for weeks now, how can anyone vote for any of these politicians who voted for the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, which effectively took away the rights of women and girls in this country, 52% of the population, and have as yet, despite the Supreme Court's judgment, have not as yet enforced the Supreme Court judgment on the Equality Act in all areas of Scottish public life. John Swinney has still not met with the women for Women Scotland, whom he promised nearly a year ago that he would meet with as soon as he possibly could. But I believe he's in Zambia, and I don't think for Women Scotland organise in Zambia quite at this time. Now, the real thing we have to think about for next year is this. Who are we voting for? Are we voting for politicians who have clearly have made very plain to the population that they are not fit to hold office? They are not fit, indeed, to even stand for election because they cannot tell the difference between a man and a woman. That they have enforced an ideology on this country for the past 10 years, entirely and completely illegally. And for my money, that should disbar any and all of them for even standing for election. And as for those of us who believe in independence, do I want the independence of my country to be negotiated by people who cannot tell the difference between a man and a woman? Well, frankly, no, I don't. That's just a straightforward fact. 60% of the people of this country supported what has become commonly termed the rebel amendment at the SNP conference last year, which was to have a plan B in the event of Westminster saying no to a majority in the Scottish Parliament as being an independence majority. Now, that's all fine and good. But if the leader of the Scottish National Party, the deputy leader of the Scottish National Party, the deputy First Minister, who won't even be standing next year, are telling us that everything that we do between now and May of next year, we should stick behind them because they have a secret plan. These secret planners are the same people who could not tell the difference between a man and a woman in the prison estate in Scotland. These are the very people who have who supported and employed a male, self-identifying male, as head of the Rape Crisis Centre in Edinburgh. Now, I'm sorry. For me, this is about first principles. How can you possibly trust, with the negotiation of the future of our country, or indeed going into an election to create an independent Scotland, how can you trust people who only a year ago were prepared to throw the rights the hard-won rights of women and girls in this country down the toilet for their own benefit because they'd taken up some fashionable notion, because that was what was demanded of them by the previous First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. These people cannot be trusted. They should not even have the temerity to stand for election, never mind urging people to vote for them into positions in government. Sorry, it just makes me very, very angry the way they insult the people of this country. They think that we've all forgotten that they stood up and cheered for a bunch of blokes in frocks when they've got their ridiculous gender recognition reform bill through the Parliament, which was then struck down by the Westminster government. These are the very people who allowed the legitimisation of our colonisation by putting forward the absurdity that was the GRRB and allowing Westminster to come to the rescue of women and girls in Scotland. Despicable, utterly despicable.
Yeah. Another flaw actually in their plan, this great plan of theirs, Eva, that we can, replicate what Alex Salmond did in 2011 and get this majority of MSPs. The thing is, Alec got 46.4 or something of the votes. The SNP are languishing somewhere between 30 and 35%. They're going down the way. They're not going up the way. There's no way they're going to be able to get to 40, let alone the 46%.
They know that. We know that. Any thinking person knows that, including this week, Robin McAlpine, who wrote an absolute roaster of an article called When Strategy Isn't Strategy at All. So if you've not read it yet, please do. It's unmissable. Now, I said last week that theoretically, the SNP could get a majority of seats, but they'd get it on about 35 to 40% of the popular vote. That will not be recognised as a legitimate support of independence. And if John Swinney goes to Keir Starmer, or perhaps by then his successor, pleading for a referendum, he will get knocked back. Of that, there can be no possible doubt. So that answers the question, what happens when Westminster says no? Westminster probably won't be able to be asked because John's not going to get the majority he wants anyway. However, what we must bear in mind is the importance of next year's election. We cannot afford another 5 years of, we might do this, we might do that, we might be something else, I've got something up my sleeve, the beg and bull mentality, continued austerity, continued unnecessary poverty. And I would remind people that what they should maybe do is have regard to the words of Derek Pretzwell. He was the mover of Amendment A, and the purpose of Amendment A last week at the SNP conference was to create unity within a campaign for all independent supporters to be able to speak to each other and to vote in a fashion that would actually create a vote for independence next year that would have international recognition and legitimacy. But in his speech, in his closing words, what Derek said was, you are not expected to stand on the field of Bannockburn, but you are being asked to be strong and resilient to fight for your country first. You're being asked to fight, not to plead. Independence is not a policy document. It is a state of being for our nation. The fight for our freedom is not confined to this party, to this conference, or to these halls. It starts here if we have but the courage to do so. Fighting words, and I was pleased to hear them. Well, I was pleased to read them, and it is the spirit that should be coursing through the veins of every independentista these days, and all day and every day until we have that vote. What we don't need is more of the same from the SNP. We need them to understand that a concerted campaign towards independence is the only way to go, because otherwise, as I said at the start, will prolong our country's agony and the suffering of our people unnecessarily. We'll continue to be, in theory, resource rich, energy rich, asset poor, and the highest energy bills in Europe and perhaps even in the world. However, to develop that argument a little, if you look holistically at where we find ourselves in the movement There are people, as you said in the introduction, Roddy, from the SNP, from other parties and from no parties who've been in touch with us in the last wee while. And it's because they see the beauty of Liberate Scotland and the banner that says independence, nothing less. Now, I have it on good authority from somebody pretty high up in the SNP that polling, which has not been disclosed and it's not been published, strongly suggests that currently support for independence on its own, support for independence, is at least into the 60-odd%. The problem is the SNP cannot capture the difference between the support for independence and the support for their party. That's why the SNP do need to unite with and talk with others so that we deliver independence, so that next year John Swinney and others who may be elected in place of those he might have preferred to be elected are able to put a strong case internationally, legally and politically based on a democratic result of a democratic election. You cannot have a position where you say, and it's not a tenable position to say, you're allowed a referendum if the SNP win, but you're not allowed any kind of international recognition if the winners are a collaboration of independent supporters who were deliberately chosen to represent the electorate by an electorate who were educated, who understood when they looked at a ballot paper when it said independence, nothing less, that they were voting for independence. Because one of the dangers of people voting for the SNP in their current circumstances is that the Unionists will be able to say, but the SNP have a myriad of policies. You cannot say, you cannot signify, you cannot designate a vote for the SNP as simply being a vote for independence. But you can do that with Liberate Scotland. And that is the avalanche of support that is necessary to persuade not just Westminster, because they're not going to listen anyway, but to persuade the rest of the world and to use in the courts if necessary, so that we facilitate our route to independence. And it happens now, not in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, when we're all dead and buried, turned to dust, and Scotland has become the desert that others long ago predicted it might be. Can I just say finally, in terms of what sort of commitment are the SNP showing, just check their website. Go on their website and Google independence. You'll get a surprise, because what is not there is the outcome of last week's conference. What is not there is their up-to-date position on how to attain independence. Keith Brown, my MSP, whom I will be challenging for his seat next year, in his speech said that the work on a convention has already begun. Then he said it's going to start tomorrow, meaning last Sunday. Go on to the SNP website and Google convention, and guess what? The last mention of it is 2.5 years ago. And prior to that, it was last mentioned there by Keith Brown. And prior to that, it was last mentioned there by Nicola Sturgeon. It's not been mentioned since that razzmatazz of last Sunday's grand reveal. However, that convention that he announced is not an independence convention. He called it a convention including public figures, civic bodies, perhaps also the STUC, and it was to be a meeting of people who believe that Scotland has the right to decide. There is no need to have a meeting of people who believe that Scotland has the right to decide, because that includes those who support the Union. The need is a meeting of minds of those who believe that Scotland has the right to be an independent country once more.
In fact, I don't know if you know, you weren't there at the time, but the SNP moved a motion down at Westminster Phil to the claim of right, and it went through unopposed. Now, if they support the claim of right, as we all do, and believe in the claim of right, you believe that the people of Scotland are sovereign. Well, if we're sovereign, why are you asking anyone, especially someone in a foreign country, if you're serious about independence? Because the sovereign Scots don't need permission.
Well, there's the catch. You put a caveat in there, if you're serious about independence. And the answer is they are not. Very, very simply. I mean, we're obviously very close with the brilliant work done by Salvo, by Sarah Salyers, by Professor Alf Baird, Craig Murray, the phenomenal KC, Mr. Black. It's phenomenal what they're doing, and they've gathered together a really good group of people along with SSRG, and they're pushing the cause, and they're making a reasoned, intellectual, thought out process and argument that makes sense. And if you're not listening to that, which the SNP are aware of it, but they're not listening to it, they're refusing to even take cognizance of it. They're refusing to even consider that this may be something that we might consider to put forward to be taken seriously on the international stage. And when you're not doing that, if you're not looking at all of it's an oversimplified approach the SNP have taken. Capture your vote, corral them, feed them garbage and the nonsense. It's like the whole modern political system. Lie to people, feed them basic information, keep everything else covered up and pretend that you're doing something that you're not. They're supposed to be representing the benefit of the people of Scotland. And by ignoring the fact that there are well documented, well charted ways to take us to independence and instead continue with this utter garbage that everybody knows isn't going to work. The Brits know it, the SNP know it, and yet why do they continue to push this forward? Well, I didn't see the rest of it, but we all predicted this from before. We knew that Swinney was going to do this. We knew that the SNP were going to do that. And the second part, as we approach this, I don't know if they've done it already, but I'll put money on this. It'll be SNP 1 and 2 again.
Oh, they've done that. They've done that.
Oh, they already done it? There you
They've
go.
done that,
That gives me no satisfaction. It gives us no satisfaction. And it just drives home the fact that the only solution here is the removal of these obstacles to our independence. Those obstacles being the current leadership of the SNP. And there's so many in the SNP who, and we understand that it goes back to what Wings talked about, what we've talked about. Nobody likes to be advised or told that they've been fooled. But it takes courage to put your hand up and say, I was wrong. For example, went down to Westminster believing I was going to be the last MP for Coatbridge. I was wrong. We achieved nothing. I followed and stayed loyal to the SNP when others, including Stuart Campbell, the Rev, piped up and said, hey, things are going wrong here. And a few others that heads up, people that we know. And I went, no, keep the faith. It's a compromise. There's a plan. We'll get there. It'll work. No, we were conned. They were infiltrated. They have been infiltrated. We know how the dark arts work in politics, and the SNP are completely taken over by the British establishment, and therefore do not represent the Scottish people and our will to gain independence.
No, on that, not only do they ignore the sovereign will of the Scottish people and the claim of right. I noticed, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, I've invited Stephen Kerr. I give that man hell. I give all unionists hell. And I tell you what, I'm not blocked. In fact, I was blocked by Anna, but suddenly he's unblocked me. I'm surprised. I don't know why. I didn't send him a love letter, that's for sure. But I'm blocked by about 40 SNP, MSPs and MPs. We're meant to be on the same side. You maybe think of a different route, but we're meant to be independentistas. I was 5 decades in that party, but they've got me blocked. They've got me blocked everywhere. They don't want to hear. And on talking on that, Alan, Phil's talked about this on this show and privately. I know of an MSP, I won't name, but was earning 10, 12 grand a year. And I was talking to them before the election and said, what about this GRR thing? And he said, oh, Roddy, don't worry about that. He said, that's a load of nonsense. It'll never even get to the parliament. And I've been talking to all my friends in the party and all the ones that are going to be standing. We won't be doing it. That person voted for every single frame, every single vote. They're now earning 80, 90 grand a year. They don't need independence. They're laughing, Alan. And that's the problem. We put too many people in. We put our trust in people who have feathered their own nest and don't give a shit. That's the real problem.
Yeah, for far too long, we've had politicians who are possibly start off with good intentions.
Yeah.
But are weak-willed, and they allow the civil service to stroke their ego, and then they become very dependent on the wage and perks that they get in Parliament. And therefore, they will not rock the boat. That's why we need people into the Parliament with a backbone who are looking for one thing and one thing only, and that is the independence of our country. But you said earlier on that the opinion polls have the SNP about 30-35%. Actual polls in elections have them on a lot less. They're just hitting over 20%. That's the real truth. Apathy is winning. The independence movement are not coming out to vote for the SNP. Now, Scotland is at the junction that Ireland faced in 1918. They had a choice. They had a parliamentary party who were quite cosy in Westminster, or they could vote for another party who were committed to the independence of their land, but at that stage had very little electoral success. The people of Ireland grew a massive backbone and took the risk on that party. And that party threw the parliamentary party out of office by winning over 70 seats and taking a majority and leading their nation to freedom. And that is what we have to do here and now. I mean, I will say quite clearly, right into the eyeballs of every single Scot, on the 7th of May, 2026, are you prepared to sit at home, lie on the battlefield, and allow Westminster to walk straight over you, sitting by while our children are starving, our pensioners are freezing, and our workers are being screwed right, left, and centre? Or are you prepared to go into battle by entering the ballot box and putting your X beside Liberate Scotland? Because that is what we are needing. We're not asking you to put down your life. We're asking you to spend 5 minutes of your time to go out to the polling station and place your X beside the party that will liberate our land. So please don't allow apathy to grow. If you do not come out and vote, that is actually a vote for this union. So if you're prepared to just sit at home and do nothing, then you are supporting the actions of the Westminster Parliament. You are bowing the knee. Scots don't bow the knee to anyone. So please come out and make sure your voice is heard loud and clear. And that means pushing aside the party that we had so much faith in for so long and replacing them with the party who are more about actions rather than words. And as our slogan goes, we are about outcomes, not incomes. So please bear that in mind and come out and support us.
Well said, Alan. On Lloyd, as I said, we've been inundated with lots of inquiries and people getting in touch and lots of telephone conversations. I know you all have had the same conversations I've been getting as well. But one of the things people keep asking me and I say to us, I'd be devil's advocate for a minute and say, well, what happens? We want to hear from you guys on PRISM. What happens when Westminster says to join? No. What then? What are the routes, Lloyd? What can we do?
Well, the most obvious thing to do would be to call an immediate snap election on the basis of that Britain won't play ball, so we'll have a snap election on the basis of we will declare ourselves independent immediately after that election. That's one thing they could do, but what they could do, far more importantly, right now, is actually get together with the other elements of the national movement. You know, we had the fact that the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, Salvo Liberation, have been to Geneva and been to New York in support of New Caledonia's decolonisation. The fact that these individuals, working entirely out of their own natural desire for the independence of the country, are making the moves that you would have expected the actual Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government to be making moves, but they're not even talking to them. They need to talk to them. They need to talk to Liberate Scotland. They need to talk to Alba. They need to realise that May 26 gives us the opportunity to have the independence election. Now, they may be afeared of that concept, and I can understand why. But the case for independence has never been more pressing, particularly when we see, you know, what's on the horizon in terms of the likelihood of a massive change in government in England, particularly, and a shift to a populist right-wing government under Farage. That is a possibility, and it's something which would damage this country enormously. But more importantly than that is the simple, straightforward fact that every single day that we are not in control of our own economy, and that we're not in control of future and forward planning for the country, particularly on an economic basis, that what we're doing is we're effectively maintaining that 1 in 4 children in poverty, those 1 in 5 pensioners in poverty. We're perpetuating that, and we need to stop it. We need to bring it to a halt. But the only way that's going to happen is if people are prepared to put aside their egos. And for my money at the moment, I can't see that happening with those so-called senior members of the SNP who are not standing down at the election next year. I can't see them being prepared to get into a room with the people that they need to get into a room with. So for me, all I would say is that the greatest blockage we have to independence at the moment is the Scottish National Party. And in some ways, despite the fact I'm a card-carrying member of said party, the destruction of the SNP in May of next year, I think, would be a blessing, not only to the SNP, its membership, but also to the country, for one reason and one very good reason. The next generation of politicians that are coming up are not they are not politicians. They are potential politicians. They are potential candidates. The next generation of potential candidates that are coming up from the SNP really are not, they're not of the standard required to run a country. Neither are they of a standard to negotiate the freedom of a country. And I worry that given the SNP policy of vote the SNP on the constituency and on the regional list, that we get saddled with a bunch of people who really, really do not understand what they're getting themselves into. Mm-hmm. Because the 10, 11 years since Alex Salmond stood down, where the iron grip of first Nicola Sturgeon on the selection processes and the demands made on the loyalty tests, which were, primarily the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, was the loyalty test for advancement within the Scottish National Party. So absolutely everybody who has been an approved candidate since Nicola Sturgeon took over, Hamza Yousaf subsequently took over, and John now, every single one of those people who has been approved to be a candidate has proven themselves to be someone who effectively will say anything that their leader tells them to say, believe anything their leader tells them to believe, and does not pay any attention whatsoever to what the needs of the country and the needs of the people are. In circumstances like that, I think after Westminster says no to John, he should disband the Scottish National Party. That would be the only honourable thing to do. That's not going to happen. It's obviously not going to happen. But we're not in the circumstances at the moment. I cannot, in any conscience whatsoever, look at the list of candidates that are standing at the election next year and look at that list and say to myself, there is someone on that list I can vote for. Because if I look back to the list of candidates that there were in 1999, when I stood for the Parliament, when I got elected to the Parliament, we had people with real lifetime experience in education, in social work, in law, in the third sector, in housing, in manufacturing, in business, in the trade union movement. All of these skills were represented in that group of people who were elected in 1999. There was also an age range, which ranged from, I think Duncan Hamilton was the youngest at 22, up to 70-year-olds. So in actual fact, the parliamentary group was a spectrum of the actual nation. What I'm doing when I look at the SNP candidates list for the present time, I'm looking at a bunch of people under 40, the vast majority of whom are actually under 35, with no life experience other than having worked for the Scottish National Party or some member of the Scottish National Party. This is no way to prepare your country for the negotiations required to get the best possible settlement for the future of our country, when we have to sit down with the Brits and actually discuss how we're getting out of this union. Now, I'm sure I've gone completely off the question that you asked me, Roddy, but these are things that need to be said. You can't, just because someone puts their hand up and says, I'd quite like to do that. Politics is not like that. People have to have abilities. They have to bring skills to the table. And the people who choose them, the members of the party, have to be honest with themselves and with other people. Just because somebody's got a happy, smiley face and they might be quite a nice person doesn't mean that they can be the Minister of Justice. It doesn't mean that they can run the health service. It doesn't mean that they can get the A9 jeweled. The lack of skills amongst the candidates, particularly for the Scottish National Party, because they're the ones that I know, the lack of skills is frightening, in actual fact. How can you put people up in front of the electorate and say, vote for this person? This is some of the best of the membership of our party. They went to university, they worked for an MP, they worked for an MSP, they're now a special advisor. That is no basis upon which to create a government for a country. What that is doing is simply putting party before country at every possible angle, and it's wrong. It's completely and utterly wrong.
Yeah, I would suggest there's others ones that are, you said under 35, there's some under 30 who I find, including the gravy bus girl, who I find quite scary. But you talk about that, they worked, they left school, went to uni, got a job. Kezia Dugdale, whose father was a devout independentista and SNP man. She was desperate to get a job as an intern with the SNP and she couldn't get it. Next minute, she's in the Labour Party working for George Fawkes, and she became a Labour MSP and a Labour leader. Again, I don't know what age she was. Was she 14 or something when she became leader of the Labour Party? I don't know. Something ridiculous like that. And in fact, in Alf Baird's book about Downhodden, he talks about it. It's throughout every country in the land where there's been an independence movement, the Independence Party tends to fail, the first one. It's like pioneers never get the success. It's the ones that come after. And it was the same in Ireland with the Irish Parliamentary Party, and it was Sinn Féin who come in and did the deed. And you could go through all these countries. And, Alf foretold this. We're now seeing it in action. What I'm seeing a lot of, Eva, the bots are out. They're really coming, and they're coming after Liberate Scotland, which tells me we're doing something right, and they're not liking it. But what they're talking about is this splitting the vote. Well, you're going to be splitting the vote if you do this. Now, two things I'd like to say. Correct me if you think I'm wrong. At the beginning, Liberate Scotland tried to have an amalgamation of all the parties. This was because we didn't get the Constitutional Convention. We said, let's talk about it. And you've said it so many times. One independence candidate in the constituency and a negotiated list. Now, is that still the position of Liberate Scotland? Because I know you have to stand now against the SNP, but that's because it's not Liberate Scotland who are splitting the vote. It's the SNP by refusing to join in with the rest of the independence movement. They're the ones that are splitting the vote, not Liberate Scotland.
But you see, what you've reminded me of there, and so did Lloyd, is that we put so much energy into promoting and fighting for independence that we're not putting as much energy as we could into rebuilding the parts of our country that need to be rebuilt. But you have to consider what would happen at an election once Scotland is independent. The SNP would not be elected. They would not be a majority. They would not be in power. And that gives you every justification from an SNP perspective as to why the leadership of that party will not participate with a movement which is increasing in popularity, where we've narrated very simply what the process is to give us international recognition and legitimacy. Because what we need is an electoral event where people have the choice to vote for independence. We don't get that as a referendum that we can legally, at the moment, hang our hats on in Scotland as the result of Nicola Sturgeon's folly in applying to the Supreme Court. We won't get it as a result of a grant from Westminster, because we know how many times they've knocked it back already. So we have to have that electoral event as an election. And the Holyrood election is the ideal opportunity for it. And it is the only opportunity that is coming in time to save our skins. And by our, I mean the people of Scotland's skins. So we need next year's election to be run in essence as a de facto referendum. That's what the SNP rebels want. It's actually more or less what Alba are saying, because that's why they promote voting Alba on the list. But what should be happening is all independent supporters should be collaborating to do what you've outlined there, which is to create a position where we're guaranteed a majority of the popular vote and a majority of the seats, because these two things together give us legitimacy, democracy, and in conjunction with the attempts that Phil has referred to by Liberation Scotland and by Salvo, Alf Baird, Ailsa Gray, Professor Black, SSRG, these are all big thinkers, big movements. They have popular support, and all of that collectively, because you've got the democratic result, you've got the popular vote, you've got popular support, you've got international support, international recognition, gives you the legitimacy to say to Westminster, that vote, people knew what they were voting for. All these folk, these millions of people that voted for independence, nothing less, between the constituency and the list, are the sovereign people of Scotland, and they have given voice to their power. And you have to respect their voice, because international law down all the days, doesn't matter where you go, says in those circumstances, when you've had a democratic election and it is organised in that fashion and the results are beyond question, as long as you've got that majority of votes and majority of seats, you are entitled to your independence. Now, can I just slightly take a step back and ask all the viewers, including the one who said, he can't stand my voice because I'm the most divisive person in the independence movement. Hiya, I think your name's Charlie. All those viewers who say that I'm divisive, I challenge you to tell me, who would you rather have negotiating Scotland's independence? Me and Alan Petrie, assisted by Lloyd and Phil and all the others round about us? Or do you want to trust that time in our country's history that secures the future destiny of our country? Do you want to trust that to the people that you saw clapping and cheering for John Swinney last weekend? Or do you want to see people that go out there determined to bring home to Scotland the World Cup every 4 years from now till kingdom come? We're no 90-minute nationalists. We never have been, we never will be. We're here for the long game, but the long game can begin to be completed in May 2026 if support for Liberate Scotland continues to rise as it is.
Here, well said. You know, the clock's kicking on, but something you missed last week. I'm going to play this. I played this video last week, Phil. I'm going to play it constantly because it needs to be said. Because while they were all, as Eva says, cheering and applauding, and it was the payroll and the husbands and the wives and the councillors who actually outvoted the 43 branches. It was all them. And we'll get this. And one more mandate, just one more mandate, and we will get our, Westminster has to say yes. This was 2 weeks
is in your power. It's your decision. Will you allow a second independence referendum?
At the last budget, we had a record settlement for Scotland, more money than has ever been given to Scotland under the budget.
You're not answering my question.
I will come to that. I just want to
well, we're nearly out of time, sir.
Because the point about independence for me is it's a distraction tactic which is always deployed by the SNP when they don't want a discussion about their
You won
record.
a majority at the last election. You're doing things that weren't in your manifesto. If the SNP win a majority, why can't they do what's in their manifesto?
I'm expressing my deeply held view that whenever the SNP are pressed on their record in office,
but you're not ruling it out. You're not ruling out an independence referendum.
We're not having an independence referendum. It is a distraction.
So you are ruling it out. It won't happen.
It won't happen. It is a distraction.
Despite, even if they win a majority.
It is a distraction from the record of the SNP.
So that was before the conference, Phil. So if we saw that and we knew that and we heard that, the voting delegates and John Swinney and his leadership must have seen that. And yet, Phil, they continued. What's going to happen next? He gets, let's say he's the biggest party. What happens next? What will Westminster say to him?
What we've just heard, it's nothing changes. Absolutely nothing changes here. We know, everybody knows this. And a couple of variables that we need to consider, a couple of factors, key factors here. First of all, Starmer, of course, was lying. We know that because he was talking, and he said that there was more money, and that's true. The factual figure went up, but not in real terms.
No.
What happens in the balance in the books, and when inflation is higher than your wage increase, in real terms, you're getting less. And that has been the game that has been played all along. The second factor here that's critical, and we've talked about it a few times, but in a nutshell, I was looking for the most concise way to explain what the doesnt system is, because that message has got to go over. Right, first of all, obviously I live in Belgium and the States at the minute, but doesnt is the highest average method, named after a Belgian lawyer from the 1870s. Now, unlike single transferable vote, it does not use a quota or formula to allocate seats or posts. Instead, they are allocated singularly and one after another. And the basic idea, this is the whole point of the system, is that a party's vote total is divided by a certain figure which increases as it wins more seats. So as the divisor becomes bigger, the party's total in succeeding rounds gets smaller, allowing parties with lower initial totals to win seats. That's why you can't win it, John, you bozo. Everybody knows this. These are the rules. We've been saying it for decades, and this guy's still coming out with the same mantra because he's doing exactly what he's told and always will be. Can't be trusted. Traitor to the people of Scotland, as is everyone who's currently in the leadership of the SNP. They have to be removed, and removed politically, I mean, permanently politically, because they're not doing anybody any favours. They extend the pain and suffering that our people have unnecessarily suffered for 11 years. Since Nicola came in, she was handed the golden keys, promptly sold them instead of using them to open a door to a bright Scottish future for us and our people. And that's 11 more years of drug deaths, 11 more years of children in poverty, 11 more years of the erosion of our resources and our faith and our trust. And the battle's getting harder and harder as more and more of these shysters, as Lloyd has put it so eloquently, come into power. These people are kids, children. It's like the children's crusade all over again. Children politics. What? Jesus, are we out and playing your bike, you wee diddy? You know, it's just it's nonsense. You're not going to lead us to independence. You're just a wee. You're there to be manipulated, and that's why you were selected in the first place. So no, it's not going to happen, Roddy. We all know it's not going to happen. John knows it's not going to happen, and yet he continues to come out with this barefaced lie. You're a disgrace, John Swinney, and all the rest in the current cabinet, and all the rest of the leadership that support this, and every bozo and clown that clapped. Now you call it divisive. If someone's walking into a trap or into a pit, shouldn't you warn them? I mean, how many times you got to slap them in the back of the head to say, "Wake up"? Well, I forgot they're already woke, so there's no chance.
Yeah, but you alluded to it earlier, Alan, and I say the time's running, but I'd like to cover it. A lot of people have been saying, and I remember hearing this in the SNP, oh, you've not got enough time, you're too small, you're not getting enough votes, you'll not win a seat, you'll not get anywhere. But here's the by-election down in Ayrshire this week, and it's worth having a look at. The local council election, only 27% turned out, 73% of people stayed at home. However, an independent standing on one policy, Alan, which was fly tipping, he won the seat in 25.1. He took it from the SNP. Their votes down 22.5%. Labour down 3.7. The Reform are winning seats down south, not up here. The cons, they are the cons, down 14.8. It just shows you the people are prepared to back the independents and the smaller parties. If the big boys don't see that, they should.
Yeah, I mean, that independent went from a standing position of 0 votes, and he went in there and took the seat, because what people were voting for was what was dear to them. just like the independence movement, we are standing on a one policy platform. Independence, nothing less. So we are standing on one single issue that is dearest to the heart of the vast majority of the Scottish nation. And if they want it, they know where to come for it. But I mean, this nonsense whereas you've not got a lot of votes. We've already mentioned what happened in Ireland in 1918. Sinn Féin went from one seat to over 70 seats and took a majority at one single election. 2015, the Labour Party had people voting for them because they still believed that you could get socialism by voting Labour. In 2015, they realised that wasn't happening. So what did they do? They put their faith in the SNP, sending 56 out of 59 MPs down to Westminster. That was one election. In 2026, we have the opportunity of winning this at one election. Now, what I would say to people who think voting SNP on the constituency is helping is just like Labour voters voting Labour for socialism. You're no longer voting SNP for independence.
No.
If you vote SNP on the constituency, you're not voting for independence. What you're going to get is people like Keith Brown, Shirley Ann Somerville, Angus Robertson, Stephen Gethins, Alan Smith. That's what you're going to get. You ain't getting independence. So come on, people. Let's put the country before parties. Let's get people into that parliament. Let's all get behind Liberate Scotland to liberate our land.
Indeed. Put those banners along the bottom again, Techie. But also, ladies and gentlemen, get involved. You know, you're hearing it here. It can be done. There's a movement developing, but we need more and more help. And in fact, there is a fundraiser coming up on the 28th of November. The Liberate Scotland will be holding an evening where there'll be folk music, there's a DJ, there's a buffet. It's 20 quid a ticket. It's all to go towards the help the campaign for the candidates. During the day, there's also going to be a meeting with candidates and their election agents and family. And we're going to open it to the public as well to hear, because we are transparent. We don't have anything to hide. And you can come along and hear, and there'll be some really good guest speakers. But you'll have to see it. You get that if you go to the website or you email us, we'll organise a ticket. There's limited. Now, we are going to give 2 free tickets away here on Through a Scottish Prism to the first person who gives us a very good question in the comments when we go live on Sunday. So let's hear it from you. 2 tickets could be coming your way. And until that point, keep up the faith, ladies and gentlemen. Keep believing, because we can liberate ourselves, but we have to put in the effort. That's the important thing. We can't do this alone. The platform's there for you, but you've got to get your wee bums in gear. Until we see you again, you and yours, please, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.